I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
Pete, we all avoid, right? We all want to do the easy thing and pull the covers over our head. Sometimes I know I do. How about you?
I do. Now that you just said that, I had a principal once that was like, whenever you're like afraid of the night, and he was like, "What are you going to pull your covers over your head?" And then all of a sudden the burglar won't get you. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. They wouldn't. They would get me still."
Yeah, you're like this, but maybe I will. I'll still do it. Yeah. Well, so for that reason, Pete and I are going to be talking about avoidance today. So, I think it's important to clarify what avoidance is, because of course it's a word we all, kind of like say out in the world, right? Like we're going to avoid doing something or whatever. But from a behavioral science lens, avoidance means something really specific. Yeah. So, of course, I'm going to jump in with some definitions, not Webster ones though.
Oh, but I have to give my Webster one.
Fine. All right.
The action of keeping away from or not doing something.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
You're not mad at that.
I'm not mad at that. Sometimes I like shake my fist at Webster that I'm like, they need to hire some psychologists. But no, okay, that's right. So avoidance from a psychological perspective really means avoiding something that is unpleasant in some way. So we're engaging in a behavior where we're moving away from something that's unpleasant. So as we talk about a lot on here, behavior can be both overt, right? So you could avoid having a conversation with someone that's difficult, right? That would be an overt avoidance behavior. But it can also be covert, right? Like you can avoid something inside your body, right? Like you could push away a memory you don't like, or you could try to push away an emotion. And we do this because when we run away from something, move away from something that's unpleasant, in the short term, in the moment, it feels relieving, right? Like we get a sense of relief. And that sense of relief is very reinforcing to our brains. Our brains then learn, hey, that quote unquote worked, right? I know, I'll do it again next time. So it's actually something, the behavioral term is it's negatively reinforced. Negative, by the way, listeners, doesn't mean bad. In behaviorism, poorly named in my opinion, but negative means taking
it's so
away
poorly
something.
named that we always have to do that. So
named.
negative reinforcement is the removal of a stimulus. Right.
Yes,
so taking yourself out of an environment or removing some kind of experience that's creating discomfort. Thank you for that.
Right. Discomfort. Right. And then reinforcement means the behavior is more likely to happen again in the future. So if we take away anxiety, anger, sadness, think of all the, a memory you don't like, a thought you don't like, your brain goes, I really like that. I think I'll do that behavior again. And then we end up kind of stuck in a pattern of avoiding things that are uncomfortable.
Right. So, I mean, maybe we could break down some examples for like maybe some like common.
Throw some out.
Well, I feel like you're always better at the examples, but I mean, obviously, like easy ones would be like getting off of a bus when it gets really crowded or uncomfortable, or pulling off the highway because we're driving and I see a bridge coming on. A bridge coming up and I don't want to go over the bridge. But that's difficult conversation. So if I'm having an argument with a loved one, then if I maybe don't go to dinner or don't hang out or don't go to the meeting because I don't have to see them, that's avoidance. Any others? I mean, lots of others.
So, I was like, oh my gosh, so many. So many ways to avoid as a human. I can't cover them all. Well, avoiding vulnerability, right?
Yes.
Like sharing how you really feel with somebody, right? We could even say avoiding vulnerability with yourself, like not acknowledging to yourself that you feel a certain way.
So sort of like when you wanted to avoid when East meets West when I first presented it to you.
That's a great example. It's a great example. Check out our vulnerability episode from season 1 if you want to hear more. Hear more about that. That's certainly avoidance. When people engage in unhelpful coping behaviors, right? Like substance abuse, for example, right? Like drinking,
that's avoidance,
right? Like overeating or restricting food, right? Devices, right? Turning on all the devices so you don't have to be in the moment, right?
I love a good overeat. I'm just going to put that out there for everybody. A binge. Again, I mean, I'm not minimizing it because it can be really, challenging for some people, and it's really comforting. So I think, if I'm having a stressful day, to avoid that, I might eat a little extra.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we do other things that are about, avoiding what's happening in our inside of our bodies by sometimes, like I said, suppressing emotion. We'll push things down, try to push thoughts out of our mind, right? We might fantasize, right? Or imagine other things. That can be avoidance, right?
Yeah.
I do think it's important to acknowledge that all these behaviors Pete and I are talking about, they're not inherently avoidant, right? So in behaviorism, we are always clear to identify that the function of a behavior, meaning like what a behavior is intending to do for us, right? There's a reason why we do things,
Right.
Is determined by the context. So if we go back to substance use, for example, if you, have a glass of wine at the end of the day, it's not necessarily indicating that you're avoiding something, right? You might just enjoy wine. You might just enjoy the sense of, relaxation that the substance induces chemically, right? However, if you are coming home and drinking, I don't know, like 5 hard liquor drinks, right? And because you're feeling very, very anxious or very, very sad. I
love that you just said hard liquor drinks.
Well, trying to be general and specific at the same time here, right? Trying to be both, right? That would indicate avoidance, right? That you're trying to avoid emotion. So, I do think it's important that, as we're talking about this, that listeners aren't jumping to the conclusion like, oh no, if I do these things, I'm avoiding everything, right?
Well, because it's everything in moderation.
Correct. Well, and to that point, I'm glad you're saying that, Pete. Avoidance as well. Like I always say to patients, like, we can't be mindful 100% of the time. Like there is a degree of like, sometimes we're going to avoid things, and that's okay. That's still a holistic, you can still be holistically healthy and engage in avoidance behaviors because there's no way not to, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, and when you pour the second or third glass of wine, let's say in that example, what we do is we might do that mindfully, so that, like I'll say to like, say college age, kids or things like, shots never have like a good outcome, like a shooter, there's, or if you're trying to break down intent, like what's the intent of a shot?
Right. Totally.
The intent is, to get to like blackout. I mean, ish. I mean, if you're really being honest, I mean, this is probably what's there. Yeah.
Sure. No, totally. Well, and so bring some mindful awareness to the process. Absolutely. Though I think also maybe what I'm wanting to emphasize is that, like, if we go to the devices, for example, right? Okay. In the modern era, we all do that sometimes. We all, like, let's say
you're really good at that. You don't do that much.
I mean,
well, because you at least have this healthy relationship with social media, because I think that's a lot of people that's where they get.
That's true, but I mean, I can be on my, like, I can be like watching TV and like be on my phone and like someone's sitting next to me. Do you know what I'm saying? That's like,
right.
I do. I mean, I'm a person, right? So it's like I definitely can struggle with that, and I think what I want to communicate is that it's having compassion for oneself, that we can't eliminate avoidance behaviors from human experience.
No.
What we can do, to Pete's point, is become aware of them and try to reduce them overall. So it's not our main coping tool, right? Because that's where it becomes a problem.
Because there's this APA definition of avoidance that I think you're going to like.
I'll probably like that one.
This one you're going to like, because it also breaks down. So the practice or an instance of keeping away from particular situations, environments, individuals, or things because they're either A, the anticipated negative consequence of such the encounter, B, anxious or painful feelings associated with them. So psychology brings several theoretical perspectives to the study of avoidance. So it uses it as a means of coping, like you just said. It uses as a response to fear or shame. That's a big one. Its existence as a personality style or predisposition. So some of us just tend to be more avoidant. And lastly, its existence as a component of anxiety disorders.
Yes. Thank you. I do like that definition.
I knew you would. That's why I had to read it.
I'm so glad you did. Well, I think actually, because I do want to talk a little bit about how we target avoidance, both clinically and from an Eastern lens. Yeah. Well, because mindfulness is, guess what, guys? All roads lead to mindfulness. We're going to be doing. But boom. I think I want to throw out one more definition that's really important, which is experiential avoidance, because that's a really important one. So experiential avoidance, which I think I have a feeling you're going to agree with me here. All avoidance, I think, really can be characterized as experiential avoidance.
Yes.
And experiential avoidance comes out of the most current behavioral science research. And really what experiential avoidance means is the brain tries to control, fix, get rid of, problem solve, ignore, suppress any internal stimuli. And so what are internal stimuli? Well, they're the things that we don't control, like emotions that pop up, right? That we don't, that, you know, they just show up.
Fear, shame,
but anything like fatigue, joy, right? Okay. So emotions, thoughts that show up.
No one's really avoiding joy, but we'll just.
Well, some people do actually.
So you're right, actually.
Right?
Like
yeah,
depressed,
anything.
Like,
yeah. Or like they feel guilty about feeling joy, right? It's like, right. Yeah. People, I mean, brains are tricky
Don't
organs.
Don't you go talk about that brain. You've been good about that lately. Don't you?
I know. I'm like, these tricky organs. Okay. So emotions, thoughts, physical sensations, behavioral urges, or memories. So these are all internal stimuli that our brains can try to fix, get rid of, control, ignore, suppress. And we can experientially avoid things both with overt behaviors, like we've talked about, or covert behaviors. So I just think that's really important to.
That was great.
Be aware of. Oh, thank you. And also,
where's that from? I mean,
what experiential avoidance?
No, just the way that you I mean, I love that you broke that down to emotions, thoughts, physical sensations, behavioral urges, and memory.
Oh, it comes out of the ACT literature.
I think I should have known that then, right?
No, you know it in there. I know you.
I'm sure it's there, but it's like it. Yeah.
I'm sure it's. and I also want listeners to know that what's really interesting is that experiential avoidance. So again, it's trying to get rid of these things. What happens is the more we try to avoid these internal experiences we don't want, what we say in ACT is the more you don't want it, the more you got it. Yeah. So it paradoxically increases it. So I tell people it's kind of like trying to put a lid on a pot of boiling water.
Yes.
We'll keep it in initially, but then it'll blow, right? It'll explode.
So I say it's like putting a beach ball underwater in the outside pool.
Oh, yes. I love that one. Oh, yes. I love what you said. That's another great one.
That's a good one, yeah.
It doesn't actually work. So the more we experientially avoid, research demonstrates that it results in increased like symptoms, basically increased emotion dysregulation. So on the surface, it seems like it's, again, quote unquote, working, right? Yeah. Because we're like, oh, we got to avoid that discomfort for a moment. But overall, holistically, it's actually creating suffering.
Well, that's a beautiful way for that negative reinforcement.
Yes, exactly. So Pete, tell listeners a little bit about how we target avoidance behaviors. Like, what are some of the things that you do clinically? Well,
behaviorally, if there's something you're avoiding, like you've already alluded to, then we need to do it. You know, so, I mean, what we do is like a hierarchy or just some sort of systematic approach to targeting whatever the behavior is. And so whether, if it is, having a difficult conversation, you might role play with it. You might imagine having the conversation, write out some of the things. You kind of get to help our clients like figure out what the feelings will be and to, at least try and practice it in session. Like you already also alluded to, all roads lead to mindfulness, so having a mindful approach to the avoidance, because what we're going to do is often judge ourselves. So like, we're not going to go into that in this episode. I think we did an episode on shame. Did we? I
stumped me.
I stumped you.
No, actually, no, I don't think we have yet. We've done
shame
one
or
on
guilt.
We've done guilt. We did it on guilt. That's right. Yeah.
So they're like cousins. And so I think, we'll talk about that with noticing, like, so from a mindful perspective, it's like noticing when you're avoiding something because of shame or guilt, because ultimately what you want to do is non-judgmentally experience it, because it's it's that gorgeous frontal lobe that's saying, hey, you shouldn't have this, or you're feeling this certain kind of way. And so we're going to say, hey, let's retrain that frontal lobe to then be able to like, I don't like the word tolerate, but to be able to like accept and experience.
Yeah. Well, and can you also, because I think this is a really helpful place to include sort of when we're avoiding, again, these internal experiences, because what Pete's really describing, which is really important, is, when people are overtly avoiding something, right? We're going to take steps to help them come into, like, if they're avoiding having a conversation with somebody, or they're avoiding, we're going to lay out steps to do that. That we can actually say, why are they not doing those things? Because they're trying to avoid something internal that they don't like, right? Like they're afraid, or they're ashamed. So this is where the mindfulness piece comes in, right? And
Right.
we have to do a lot of that work in session sometimes, right?
Yes.
So can you explain a little bit more about how you help people actually move towards contacting emotions or thoughts, or, you know, making space for the things that they're not accepting?
Yeah. So in session, you might ask them to describe, you know, how they're feeling in their body, you know, the physical sensations, like you just said, or the thoughts, the emotions associated with it, so that whether that's from recounting the story or the experience, you know, or if it's from doing a kind of visualization or a guided meditation in session around what that actually feels like in someone's body, you know. And so sometimes, I'm sure you've had this, that clients will end up like crying in session or having that really emotive experience to just release whatever it is that they may have been holding on to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think this is important to say about avoidance too, is that there can often be a belief that if somebody allows for one of these internal experiences that they don't like, right? So a thought they don't like, a memory they don't like, an urge they don't like, a emotion or sensation, that if they allow for it, if they make space for it, that one of those memories, thoughts, emotions, urges are going to actually take over.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's actually what leads to trying to get rid of it. Right. Because they're like, oh, if I let myself, I think we talked about this in our sadness episode, right? People oftentimes are afraid, oh, if I let myself feel sad, I'm going to become undone.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this paradox that actually the allowing is what helps you process it, which helps you regulate it. So much like the lid on a pot of boiling water. If you take the lid off, the water will boil, but it's not going to boil over, right? It's going to stay in the pot. And so I think this practice of targeting avoidance is also, you know, leads to people not only being able to learn the skills to regulate emotion, then from a, you know, cognitive perspective, they also learn feeling uncomfortable experiences in our bodies, thoughts, memories, they're not going to actually hurt us in any way.
I love that you just said that too, like the learn and practice.
Yeah.
You have to learn and you have to practice.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, and can I ask just one last question? Because I know we're running out of time here. Of course, I have all the questions for Pete. Is there anything that Buddhism has to say about avoidance? Like, is there, you know, is that sort of identified concretely at all? And
I mean, I think it's about interpretation, and there are these things called like the three poisons, and so I think in our English language they are ignorance, attachments, and aversion, and it's the aversion piece.
Yes.
So that's usually where you'll find some of this idea, and I think in Sanskrit it's devesha. And this is the idea of aversion or hate. And so these three poisons, they lead to that dukkha, which I've talked about before, which is the suffering. So yeah, there's a place for it, because we realize that, you know, aversion to things, and we didn't say this, and so I'll ask you about values. Like maybe as we kind of wrap up, like thinking about also values are a big piece of how you and I treat avoidance.
Absolutely. No, I'm really glad that you brought that up. Yeah, because, well, so I'm going to use language of what to link this here, because so from a behavioral lens, we do use the term aversive, right? So all the things that we're talking about have, when something's unpleasant, it has an aversive, what we say is an aversive stimulus value, right? And so values from an ACT lens, right? Things that make us feel connected, a sense of meaning, purpose. Those have, this is a really dorky behavioral word, appetitive stimulus values, which appetitive means that we want to move towards them, basically. So aversive, we want to move away. That's why we avoid. Appetitive, we want to move towards it. And so how do we help treat something that in the short term, we want to move away from it? Well, we help people access what they want to move towards. Like, so, you know, kind of the simple example I like to use is if you have you know, an individual who strongly values friendship, right? That gives them a sense of, you know, connection and meaning and warmth, and they have a lot of social anxiety, right? So being around people, even friends, also activates a very aversive emotional experience, right?
Yep.
Can they mindfully and dialectically hold both, right?
Yes.
Can you allow yourself to willingly experience anxiety while simultaneously engaging in a behavior, being with friends that aligns with one's values? And what do we find? that tends to be really helpful. It doesn't get rid of the anxiety 100% because that's part of our brains, though we do help people create more expansive lives in that way.
Yeah.
So thanks for bringing that up, Pete. That's a really important way to end here. So for our listeners, when you're thinking about avoidance, number one, start with knowing you're going to avoid. We all do it. It's a part of human experience, right? So if you find yourself avoiding, practice radical acceptance and non-judgmental stance, as well as self-compassion. And then see if you can get curious about whether or not you can mindfully come back to approaching the thing that you're trying to avoid, making space for it, and maybe reducing your avoidance behaviors overall.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin.
And I'm Dr. Pete Economo. Be present, be brave. This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes